This is a ProBoomer Boomcast.
It's my belief that the current paradigm that we've been using for retirement doesn't work for a big chunk of our population. And even beyond that, perhaps is not sustainable for our society as a whole. Tied it up nicely, we believe this is a movement, and the movement is to replace retirement with intentional living so that everybody lives their life intentionally. I started to shift my thinking from how do I be successful, which is kind of the first lens I look through, to what would my legacy be? How do I leave a legacy that my children will identify with? And then as that went on a little further, well, how do I live this legacy every day? The whole idea of the journey versus the destination. So the legacy map is just that. It's a map with specific destinations to ensure that I, in fact, live my legacy daily and in my lifetime.
This is a ProBoomer Boomcast. Information, inspiration, insight, and advice from successful thought leaders to help you launch yourself and assure the years ahead are some of your best.
In his book, Replace Retirement, Living Your Legacy in the Exponential Age, John Anderson, who has an extended, very successful executive career behind him, will, first of all, give you some really critical insights and thought starters for what the heck you're going to be doing for the remaining decades. Yes, decades of life ahead of you, healthy decades of life ahead of you, enabled life ahead of you, and also dealing with your legacy, which at this phase of life, many of us are considering. But these thought starters are really important for anyone approaching so-called retirement age, and I mean into your 40s, certainly 50s, into your 60s, at retirement age, and even beyond. The other thing I love about this book, and this is really the big point, is that there are effective, useful tools to figure out what those steps, what those goals are. And quite frankly, if you've been in business, you're going to recognize some of them because they really are fundamentally based on project and product management or business management, coming up with what are my goals, what does success look like, and how do I get there? So let's first of all start off with John's definition of what he means by replace retirement.
It is my belief that the current paradigm that we've been using for retirement doesn't work for a big chunk of our population. And even beyond that, perhaps is not sustainable for our society as a whole, both from economic reasons, that you can't have approximately half your population retired, and just from mental health reasons. Why would you want to be retired for half your life?
So what does that look like? I mean, especially the downside, and certainly on ProBoomer, we spend a lot of time trying to make people aware of how things have changed and also some of the consequences people are finding after the retirement honeymoon is over. So what does this start looking like for people who pursue this path of redefining it and reinventing it?
In my book, Replace Retirement, Living Your Legacy in the Exponential Age, I propose three possible routes. It's not limited to these three ideas, and you can do all concurrently or none of the above. But the first one is modeling what I'm doing myself, which is what does it look like to work for the balance of your life? And I'm not talking about work like I did 20 years ago, where I had a huge span of responsibility, and there were some things I did really well and got energy from, and there were other things that I didn't do so well and did not get energy from. So I'm talking about a more close-in amount of focus and perhaps mastery of a potential area. And in my case, that was writing the book. That was something I was always intrigued to do, but hadn't found the time. So that was stepping outside my comfort zone, trying something new. And then speaking on stage is the next version of that, where I'm speaking to audiences. Again, I've done small groups, but I never stood up in front of a couple thousand people and spoke before. So these are new areas that are putting me outside my comfort zone, are allowing me to stay engaged in society, keep earning money, and making an impact. So that would be kind of the first option, is what would a professional level of mastery look like for yourself that would keep you energized and excited about your day? The second option would be pursuing some artistic expression. Perhaps you played bass guitar when you were growing up, and then you get married and your spouse says, you know, that's really fun for you to do on weekends, but you can't raise a family playing bass guitar. And so you give it up and it goes into the closet and collects dust. And now perhaps is the time to pull that back out and pursue that artistic expression. And I attended a church in southeastern Michigan, and it's one of those mega churches and have about 10,000 people on a weekend. And there would be young musicians playing with older musicians, and now some of them are cutting records together. And so that's expanding. So this idea of pursuing a creative expression. And then a third option, which is probably the one that we talk about or think about most often, which is, well, I'm going to serve the community in some aspect. But without a plan and a specific strategy in place, that's just a nice idea that never gets executed on. So I'm proposing in my book any one of those three options, or maybe all combined, but to be purposeful and intentional about how you participate in the next stage of your life.
How is this approach working for you personally? Give us an insight into how you feel and what your life is like as a result of this.
Well, the first step in this process was figuring out what age I'm going to die at. And, you know, we kind of flippantly, I don't know, 80s, 90s, and we base it on our genetics and so on. And after going through this exercise, and mine's 103. And so that was the first big step in this, which is it's not 80 or 90 or I don't know, it's 103. And as soon as that got planted in my subconscious, then the next step was, well, I better start taking care of my health, not just my lifestyle, because I don't want to be broken down at 103. And then as time further evolved and I went a little further on this journey, then I started to look at, well, what's most important in my life? And I started to make a greater connection with my spiritual growth. And so now as I set up my day, I start first with spiritual, then I move on to health, and then I move on to relationships, because those are the most important things that I've identified in my journey. So the first step was this idea of, well, why don't I look at this seriously, just like I would a business? My life is a business. Where do I want to be when I finish this? What does success look like? So that made some impact in terms of the way I live my life and health. The next piece was really this, okay, if I'm going to be around to 103, what exactly am I going to do that's going to keep me, fully engaged and enjoying life? And then again, that was this idea of, well, maybe I'll write a book, and maybe I'll do some speaking, and maybe I can create some tools that my peers can use. So it was this idea that if I'm going to be living for a long time, exactly how do I show up and how do I contribute to society? And then as time went on a little further, I started to shift my thinking from how do I be successful, which is kind of the first lens I look through, to what would my legacy be? How do I leave a legacy that my children will identify with? And then as that went on a little further, well, how do I live this legacy every day? You know, the whole idea of the journey versus the destination. So I've got these specific destinations laid out, which is important. But now it's like, can I live this journey each and every day and enjoy every day as perhaps it is my last day? So then I've done a good job of enjoying every moment. And if, God forbid, something happens this evening, my kids will say, well, my dad was really living his legacy. He was doing what he wanted to do, and he had a life designed to do that.
Well, this process sounds something like a roadmap. That's a lead into you. I'm setting you up there, John.
Yeah.
So tell us about the legacy roadmap.
Okay, so we call it the legacy map. And the legacy map is broken into a couple components, and some are going to become very obvious as I explain them. And we touched briefly on the first one, which is I want you to look at the very end of your life and make this determination on exactly how old you're going to be when you die. In building that number, that 103 out, you don't describe it as, well, you know, I'm struggling through the last few hours of life or months of life. It's not like that. It's like, describe to me the ideal way that your life would end. So where would you be living? What are the activities you'd be doing? How much money would you have? Everything is painted in this sort of ideal, or I would use the term exponential lens. I want to look at it not as the worst case scenario, but the best case scenario. So after going through the exercise and defining the end of my life, kind of the idealistic version, which is a natural way to start to extend it, because it's like, well, if I'm doing that well at 103, why not live a few more years? But that's the first step, is what's it look like when I end in an ideal sense? Then I move back to about 10 years out. So I learned this from Ari Weidenswig at Zingerman's Deli, who's really the master of visioning. And so I wrote a multi-page, it's probably 4 pages, a couple thousand words, describing my life 10 years out. And so I'm about 2.5 years on that journey. So mine's about 8 years out now. And it describes waking up that morning and exactly what has taken place to get me to that point in time, in as much and as rich a detail as possible. So that vision is getting me directionally to my 103-year goal. Fair enough? So now I have goals for 103, and I've got this 10-year narrative, this rich vision of what it feels like to be at this future point in time, which is, again, very exciting, very forward-focused. From that point going back, it gets much more familiar to all of us, which is what we do in business. I've got 12-month goals. I've got quarterly targets to accomplish my 12-month goals. So every 90 days, I set another 90 days worth of targets to get my year done. Then I back that down to 30 days. So what are the 3 things I'm going to accomplish in the next 30 days that will accomplish my 90-day targets, which will accomplish my 1-year goals? And then finally, I back that down to weekly activities. What am I doing each week to make sure I'm on my way to the 30 days? And then finally down to daily. So I actually send out an email every night that sort of says, here's what I'm planning to accomplish tomorrow. Here are 3 things I've accomplished today and what I'm grateful for. So it's really a process, just like physical exercise, that I'm doing on a daily basis to ensure that I'm healthy mentally and spiritually and physically on this long-term 103 plan. So the legacy map is just that. It's a map with specific destinations to ensure that I, in fact, live my legacy daily and in my lifetime. And then there's one other component to this. Since we've got a map laid out now of where we're going and what it looks like, the next piece is to have a compass, and I call it the character compass. And in there, I look at what are my values, my family values, not business values. What are my principles? And I use principles. I borrow this from Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is I want to live a principled, centered life. And so principles can be things I both aspire to become. As an example, patient. My father never modeled patience for me, but I admire patience in others, and I admire when I'm patient myself. So that's something I'm aspiring to. So that's one of the principles I live my life by. And then a more comfortable principle is perseverance. I did learn perseverance from my father. That was a good character trait he passed on. And so my principles include things that I'm both aspiring to be and that I am, that allow me to live my life smoothly. So I've got core values for my family, I've got principles. The next thing is a purpose. My purpose in life is to inspire and challenge others my purpose is to inspire and challenge leaders to achieve their greatest personal potential. So, and I came up with this when I was about 40, but I think it's really important we all have a defined purpose that we don't have to read off a piece of paper. We can recite just like I did. So I'll break that down a little bit further. Inspire and challenge leaders. The reason why I put the word leaders in there is that I don't define leader by a title. I define leader by a behavior. You're a leader. I'm a leader, which means I'm here in life and I'm willing to climb to this point in life and I'm willing to do all the hard stuff in between. Anybody who resonates with that then typically resonates with my purpose, because that's why you and I are friends, is you're like, yeah, I'm inspired and challenged to achieve my greatest personal potential. And I'm doing that through Pro Boomers. I'm doing it through Replace Retirement. So now I've got my core values, my principles, my purpose, and then finally I have this area called high payoff activities. Again, I'm borrowing from Covey a little bit. But that's the idea that obviously I'm a big planner. You pick up on that. Sometimes my week doesn't go exactly like I planned, either from a business point of view or from a personal point of view. So in high payoff activities, I list those things that would still be a great use of my time, even if it didn't get my to-do list done. And that kind of helps with some of that anxiety, like, am I where I need to be? And am I accomplishing all the things that I need to accomplish? And in that case, and I'll give you an example of that is that I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always reading and learning. So if I'm off at a seminar or reading a book or listening to a book in the car, I'm still using my time effectively, even though I might not have got one of my to-do list items done. So the legacy map is this combination of the specific goals, an inspirational plan, if you will, and then the character compass is helping you kind of manage your energy day to day.
Well, what I love about it, and I remember first hearing about it when we first met a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, is there's some real practicality, doability with this. It's not esoteric, live your dream. And in fact, this really strikes me as a business model, that when I hear this, there are elements of a business plan, or certainly a project plan, to give structured deadlines and things of that sort. I mean, are you finding that's one of the things, that the aspects of it that make it effective, where people can actually use it and do something with it?
Yes, I think that there's a couple thoughts. One is we spend more time planning our vacations than we do our life. So this is a tool to plan our life. I think when we're in our career stage and we're busy working, the work kind of fills in some of those missing voids. So you got to get up early in the morning, you got to go off and do your work, and then there's chores to do around home. And so your schedule's fairly full. And we do get introduced to goal setting in business to a degree, but we don't necessarily port it over to our lives. So if in fact we're coming to this next stage of life where we have more freedom of time, then this idea of having a specific plan makes a lot more sense. The other thing is, I think a maturity spectrum also. You know, because I'm a business coach, I have to use all these tools and I have to apply these tools on myself in order to have integrity. But when we're younger, sometimes there's a flippantness. I'll worry about that later, and I think that's very normal because, again, we're deeply immersed into our lives and we're so busy just sort of trying to keep up. Who has time to make a plan and even execute the plan? But as we mature, this idea that, well, I'm looking more seriously at the end of my life. I do have a little more time on my hands because my kids are growing up and doing their own things. And if I'm entering in kind of this semi-stage of what would be considered retirement, then I certainly have more time on my hands. So this idea of putting a business plan together, if you will, for your life, it just starts to resonate more. And I find, by the way, you don't have to be as disciplined about it as I am. There's certain reasons I'm doing that, and the further I go on this journey, the more it feels right. But I'll use my wife as an example. So clearly she's influenced by being around me. And one of the big lifetime goals she set was that she wanted to get her doctoral degree. So she always wanted to get an advanced degree, but again, life got in the way and she was too busy. So she said, I'm going to go and get my doctorate. So she's in her mid-50s, and there are days where she's like, this is crazy. I don't know why I'm doing it. And one of the things I project back to her is, well, just think what your kids think. Like, my mom's so cool. She's off getting her doctorate. And I think when you're in your 70s, 80s, and 90s, you're going to look back very fondly on this. So that kind of keeps her motivated. So she's taken on a big goal like I have, but she doesn't have the detail that I have. In another kind of way that she looks at her life, she's not as rigorous on this program as I am, but I had her do a vision board. This is one of the things I recommend in the book. So we talked about the envisioned future, the narrative, but there's also a visual. And so my vision board is, and I think you saw it in my office, it's kind of like a little road, if you will, or trail. It's the journey I'm on, and it has specific destinations on it, because we can remember things visually better than we can like specific goals. Molly's is actually like a lake with a bunch of islands. And the islands represent destinations that she wants to achieve during her lifetime. And she is in a kayak paddling around because she likes to kayak. So that visual for her of, I can paddle to these specific islands during the course of my life, but they don't have to be in any order necessarily. But these are destinations that I want to achieve in my lifetime. And then she can choose to change which island she paddles to next. And so that helped her. So again, she's on a similar journey as I am. She has her specific age that she wants to live to. She has some big goals that she wants to accomplish, yet she doesn't work it daily, weekly, quarterly, or monthly like I do. She's happy just sort of setting goals once a year. So, you can take this to the extreme like I'm doing and get it very finite in terms of daily activity, or you can approach it like my wife and say, yeah, I'm serious about what I want to do in the second half of my life. There's some big things I want to accomplish in it, yet I'm not going to be so rigorous as to take step 1 and then step 2 and step 3.
And by way of endorsement, I'll say that over the years, listening to so many people advising entrepreneurs or successful careers or performance coaches or whatever, that having that kind of structure and accountability is absolutely critical, rather than, and especially when it's not your job and you don't have that like you said, you don't have to get up in the morning, you don't have that deadline. Creating that kind of structure, whereas I'm not a fan of that, but I find that when I do those deadlines, self-imposed deadlines and everything, despite the vagaries of life that come up, it makes a difference, and in some ways it almost makes my life easier. So I definitely endorse that. What can this look like for me at the end of it? And I say it in this context because so often what I come across in very broad terms, anecdotal, are boomers still kind of stuck in this retirement mindset, this vague vision of, I'm retired like my parents or my grandparents did, and not fully understanding the kind of possibilities that were never viewed in the context of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s. So either through what you're already seeing with other people, is this to be an entrepreneur, start a business, or redefine volunteering, where I'm actually on a more business context level helping a volunteer organization, or employment as well, redefining a way to keep working with my company or somebody else. How might this manifest itself?
Boy, there's so much in that question you asked, and I'm not even sure how to break it down. But let's start with the commonality we have, is that we're in this period of change. And, years ago, they kind of called it the information age. And of course, I'm calling it like the exponential age. But it's this idea that we're leaving the industrial age, we're moving into this next stage. Fair enough? And so with that transition, it could be, or I would argue, that the way that you and I were raised and our contemporaries does not serve us in the modern world we're in today. And so there's this potential of sort of getting lost. And I don't want to be lost and confused any more than I want my contemporaries to be lost and confused. Fair enough? So that it could be that if things were continuing at this sort of linear pace, and if we weren't in this sort of technological revolution where change is happening all around us, then maybe the way that we are introduced to retirement would work just fine. And I would also suggest that in some cases, people can follow the traditional path of retirement, and apparently it works for them. But I think that's the exception rather than the norm. So it could be that what you and I are talking about now will become normal in the next 25 years. So if we take that sort of state in place, then the next piece is that we are also seeing all these advances in the study of brains and how, we continue to understand more about humans and what makes us tick. So it could be, again, that the way that retirement has been positioned for us is in fact unhealthy rather than healthy. So wouldn't that be a shame to say that I followed a path, a roadmap, if you will, that was given to me by society that worked fine in the past, but won't work in the future. And I don't want to, again, get lost in that. So there is a little bit of sort of self-preservation in it. And so that would be my sort of first take at this, is that I'm proposing a process that seems to work well in business. And to your point, lots of authors have talked about this, and practitioners, even, Covey had it nailed, right?
Mm-hmm.
35 years ago. I'm simply saying, boy, I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There was a lot of good stuff in there, but I didn't necessarily implement it in my life. And now I'm ready to implement it in my life. So again, I'm not necessarily following on and maybe if Covey were alive today, he'd say, this isn't like an option. This is sort of mandatory. The other piece is that in this idea of living a legacy, if I'm experiencing abundance and more freedom of decisions in my life, and we talk about sometimes we kind of messed up our children because it was the idea that everybody got a trophy, right? It was all with best intentions. That perhaps with that same idea in mind, if my kids see that, gee, my dad worked hard and he sure knows how to enjoy life, but he doesn't seem to be fully invested into that life anymore, is that something that's going to attract them to follow? Assuming that they had all the money in the world, would they choose to stay engaged and work hard? And so there's this sort of self-preservation idea that maybe the old model is not going to give me the best life I want. And then is it going to also role model for my children that, geez, my father's invested every day of his life. He's always challenging himself, or their mom, always challenging, always seeking something new. So there's that kind of piece. And then one of the things that helped me in sort of getting mentally into this, in addition to just reading a lot, books like my own, is that one of the big goals, I talked about my wife and her getting her doctorate. One of my envisioned goals is at age 90, I want to be skiing on a black diamond run in Aspen, Colorado with my children and grandchildren. Now, what's nice about that is it's specific, right? It's measurable. It's 90 years old. It's Aspen, Colorado. It's a black diamond ski run. Now, one could say, maybe I don't get to do it at 90. Maybe I can only get to 82 because of this mental mindset and physical health and so on. That's still really cool. I mean, I'd be happy to do it at 82, right? So there's that idea that I know specifically what I'm doing and why I want to do it. Now, let's break that down even further. Part of it is it would be cool to ski with my grandkids. But this other piece I envision in this visioning, I envision my grandson talking to one of his buddies. And his buddy says, what's the deal with your grandfather? And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, he's skiing with us. My grandfather's in an assisted living home and yours is out here skiing. He's actually a good skier. And he's like, oh yeah, well, that's my grandpa's always been like that. He was always a good skier. My dad told me when they were young, they did all these expert runs and yada, yada, yada. So it's something I already have confidence in. It's something I am very good at it. And if I continue to stay in the game, I get to do it longer. It's also a huge risk because my contemporaries maybe it'll be different when I'm 90, but contemporaries now would say, well, you're crazy. You're going to fall and break your hip. So here's all that fear coming in, right? And so writing a book I mentioned earlier and standing in front of a stage, I'll tell you, standing in front of that stage is a lot scarier than it is going down a ski run for me right now. So I continue to deal with risk and fear and all that. So there's a lot of going on in the background there. But the biggest piece of all, and maybe this gets to why to do this, but it started with the ski idea, is that then my grandson says, let me tell you a little bit about my grandfather and how he begins his day. How he starts every morning first on his most important thing in life, and then second on his second most important thing. And this is what I do. This is what I do when I'm with my grandfather, and I've learned these skills from him. Now, for me, that's the best legacy or inheritance I could pass to my grandkids, is that by seeing me act in my life and the things I do, I get to pass that on to them. Now, to me, that's worth living a long, healthy, full life if I can pass those lessons on to my grandkids. And I learned that a little bit from my grandfather. My grandfather, fortunately, did write a book about his life. It's called The Fur Trader Story. Now, he died when he was younger, so I never got to spend any intimate time with him. And, he's old school. My father wasn't very close to me or intimate, so he couldn't tell me a whole lot. I had to kind of pry that out of him. I'm sure my grandfather would have been even worse. But in his book, I get to see a little bit more of him than possibly he even would have told me. And I identified, my grandfather was a fur trader for Hudson's Bay Company, from Scotland and was age 15 to work for the Hudson's Bay Company. This was a man who had a tremendous amount of confidence. He took great risks. He took on life and challenged it. And he grew in his field and career from being a guy running a dog sled to running the whole Northern Territories. So I identify that there's some of him in me, and I too can do these great things. I too can take on challenges and face risk. And so, that's all the things that are motivating me out of that little idea of skiing on a black diamond run at 90 with my grandkids. And oh, by the way, we are having fun together. I mean, that's kind of a traditional idea of retirement, right? You get to spend time with the kids and grandkids. So it's still baked into it, but it's much more rich and full in terms of why I'm doing it and the contribution I make. So I've got this little idea that has a big impact on me and what I want to accomplish in my legacy. And then of course it spills into every other aspect of my life, because I make friends like you that like, yeah, I'm in on that. I want to share that dream and that vision. And so that's, again, how we can contribute from just a small little slice of making John a better father, husband, grandfather, to expand it to how do I serve society following my little passion.
And to validate a couple of those points, I mean, well, first of all, by having that intention, you will do so many things in order to achieve that will be beneficial in so many different ways, starting today and all the way to age 90. I agree with you that when you talked about one of the friends saying, oh, well, my grandfather's in assisted living. Well, not having those intentions and not being active, nothing kills in retirement like retirement. And also, you even talked about the tradition of retirement. And one of the things I'm touting, and you and I have spoken about, is that what tradition of retirement? Retirement that we're thinking of now goes back to the 1950s, because up until that point, granted, people didn't live that long, but in relative terms, the equivalent of an 80-year-old today was maybe a 50-year-old 200 years ago, but that person was still relevant. That person still had purpose. And that all seems to tie back into your book, that the point is to have a reason to get up in the morning, some purpose, some drive that keeps you healthy, active, and building your legacy.
You tied it up nicely. We believe this is a movement, and the movement is to replace retirement with intentional living so that everybody lives their life intentionally. And retirement is then, it doesn't disappear, it's just reframed. One of the things we didn't discuss is right now I take about 3 months off a year. So I take the month of February off because I'm a real big snowmobiler. I snow about 10,000 miles a winter. That's one of my passions. So I need a month to do that. And then I take the month of August off and I spend that up at my cottage with my wife and friends and children and so on. So that's some rejuvenation time. And then there's probably another month if you add in the New Year's, Christmas, and the various holidays. So there's about 3 months off right now a year. My goal is to grow that up to 6 months a year, but never more than 6. I think 6 will be the balance. And of course, I'm not talking about 6 months off and 6 months on. I'm talking about extending probably the summer, because I feel like if I stopped around mid-July and then started up again mid-September, that would be really nice. And so starting to plan out, and I snowmobile a lot, but I only get to ski for a week or two. So if I could kind of spread that out. And so it's this very intentional life in terms of how am I spending my time? Who am I spending it with? What are the things I'm doing? And then always getting outside my comfort zone. And I even thought about that. I remember as a young man, it's so funny how life, what's a big deal? It's always fun to be around like a teenage girl, because everything's like really a big deal, lots of drama in their life. And you know what? When I was a teenager, it was big drama for me too, but I've so long forgotten it. But I remember back when I was going to school, and then I got hired by IBM, which was a big deal. And I was thinking about taking an educational leave from IBM, which meant that all my peers are going to be earning more money while I'm off getting my degree. But I had to sort of take this step back to step forward. And I've done that a few times. When I became an entrepreneur, I had to leave IBM, and I did the same thing. And then when I got into the coaching business, I had to do the same thing. So this idea of writing the book and so on, it's such a small step now because I've done it like 6 different times in my career. It's like, well, what's the risk? So I write a book and it doesn't go anywhere. Big deal. I'll keep doing, I'll do what I've done. And that's all part of what we have in terms of our wisdom and our experience. So how do we put that into play? Like, I'm at the best of my game right now. Why would I want to like slow down? Another great thing is, if your audience isn't familiar with it, is Carl Reiner has an HBO documentary. So if you do the HBO documentaries, it's called If You're Not in the Obits, Eat Breakfast. And Carl's 95, and he explains why this is the best time in his entire life. And then he's got like Dick Van Dyke on it, and Betty White, and Mel Brooks, and a lot of his contemporaries. And they're all just having the time of their lives. And Carl says it's never been better. And his spouse has died. And of course, he's sad to see his lifetime partner gone. But he has great friends, and he gets up every day, and he's busy. And he said, these are the best days of my life. So there are a few role models out there for us, and I'm always seeking more. The skiing one, by the way, is Klaus Obermeyer. Klaus is still skiing at 96, and he gets up in the morning and he swims. He's really careful that he takes as many calories in as he's going to expend in the day, so he balances that out. Goes into the office for like a couple hours just to say hello to folks, and then he skis for a couple hours. And his philosophy in life is never waste a good ski day. And so he's out there on Aspen Mountain. There's actually apparently a bumper sticker that says "Be like Klaus," and so there are a few of these folks out there who are doing this and making a contribution and still engaged. And they would tell us these are the best years of my life, which I wouldn't have expected to hear from a 95-year-old. So.
One more question coming up, but before that, what is the best way that people can connect with you?
We have a website, replaceretirement.com. It's not as rich as ProBoomer in terms of resources, so I still recommend going there. But we do have, you can access the book there, and we have the Legacy Map tool you can download on our website. If you read the book, you can fill it out on your own, but I will share that it is challenging. So I continue to work my legacy map because I have accountability partners, and so we really recommend that. So we can help in terms of speaking, we can help with group coaching, we can help one-on-one coaching. There's various resources. And what I'm really looking for, kind of in the long-term vision of this, is that one day I'd like to be able to provide the legacy map for essentially nothing. So, I'm kind of thinking like $1 a day type of thing, so that we'd be able to create a community of people who are using this tool, constantly enriching it. But in order to get from here to there, to be able to deliver this for effectively nothing, it's going to require more people like myself that say, hey, I really want to not only use this tool for myself, but I'd love to use it for others. And we want to help facilitate that in terms of training people to become legacy map facilitators for other folks. And I make a living doing this, and it's really enjoyable, and I work with all kinds of interesting people. But again, to get from today, which is sort of one-on-one or one-on-few work, ultimately we need to have some facility to deliver this, because everybody should have this. It should be so cheap and so easy to use that who wouldn't want to do it?
So you kind of already answered part of my last question, but I'm going to take it at even higher altitude.
Okay.
So ultimately, you just shared what you envision for your efforts. Ultimately, in society, in this country, in the world, whatever, what's your intention? What do you want to see happen out there as a result of these efforts?
I'll answer that two ways. One, in terms of how we'd get there, I envision, because I'm so involved with this Peter Diamandis. So my first reference on my book is Peter Diamandis. If you're not familiar with his book, the book title is Abundance: Why the Future is Better Than You Think. I think everybody should be introduced to Peter Diamandis and this abundance idea, because you got to look at the data. These are amazing times we're in, even though sometimes the media we hear otherwise. Not that we don't have challenges, but So we're in this period of great abundance and opportunity. So how do we leverage that abundance and opportunity? And one of the ways I see that from a technology point of view is I envision that we'll be able to put on our Google glasses or whatever that tool is, and we'll be able to immerse ourselves into a augmented reality so that I can actually see myself before going to bed each night, skiing with my grandkids in Aspen, Colorado, and doing the things that are in my goal. So imagine immersing yourself into some augmented reality where you actually get to see yourself in the future thriving and living this abundant life. I think that would do a lot to sort of reprogram some of our fears and misconceptions. So I'm confident that technology will provide that type of tool that will allow us to easily immerse into this future vision that we've designed. In conjunction with that, I would say that we would look at aging through a whole new lens, and maybe it would follow what was really going on 150 years ago, which is we didn't treat a whole section of our society as like some sort of an old part to be retired. We viewed them as contributing members of societies and families and making an impact on the planet. And so that if we have the tools that help us transition in this new period, then I would expect all of us to be making significant contributions throughout our lifetime. And I would challenge that contribution gets greater with age, simply because of wisdom. The more time you're on the planet, you kind of figure out, okay, I don't like this, I do like this. I think this is where I can make a contribution and make my biggest impact. And that just takes time. And so that maybe that's the beauty of the time, the blessing, if you will, of the time we've been given and the extra time is how do we show up and make the world a better place? Because one of the things that was a motivator for me, I remember being up at my cottage with my best friend. He's my snowmobile buddy. We do these 4,000-mile trips and everything. And he was kind of complaining about his kids. You know what's wrong with kids today? Da, da, da. And I'm like, oh my God, we're like sounding like our parents, right? And I said, that's not the way I envision myself. What I want to happen, and this is, in fact, does happen with my stepdaughter, is she says, you got to have dinner with my stepfather because it's like a TED Talk. You're going to walk away feeling really good about yourself. That's the way young people should describe us. Is that spending time with my father, grandfather, friend, whatever it is, you're going to walk away better for the experience because he's really engaged or she's really engaged in making the world a better place. So let's not complain about it. Let's not let politics drive it. Let's actively engage in creating the future we want, and do our little part. And so that's kind of the movement, is that, and you're doing it and I'm doing it and there's so many others. It's like, let's just go out there and by our behavior and action, not by the words, but how we live our lives, we are able to role model at a minimum for our children and immediate family, but perhaps, God willing, we get to do it for a larger society. And that's certainly the journey and the mission I'm on, and I'm looking for others to join that movement. And again, it's what brought us together, really through Ari. He was our common denominator. But there's a lot of folks like us that are saying, my life's never been better. I guess to Carl Reiner's point, life's never been better. I'm excited about today and tomorrow, and I just want to hang out with more people who share the same vision.
Thank you for watching another ProBoomer Boomcast. I have a favor to ask of you. We want to reach more and more baby boomers to give them the support, the ideas, and the tools, and to spread the word so that they can make a difference in their lives, their community, their friends, their family, our country, even the world. Do so by subscribing at ProBoomer.com. It won't cost you a dime. We will not inundate you with a bunch of emails. Also follow us on Facebook, ProBoomer on Facebook, and Paul Long on LinkedIn. And we are always really interested in hearing your needs, your opinions, and your ideas.
This has been a ProBoomer Boomcast. Information, inspiration, insight, and advice from successful thought leaders to help you launch yourself and assure the years ahead are some of your best.